Okay, we're going to disassemble this locomotive because for some reason I need to get inside of it. Maybe most common reason would be to oil the motor bearings if you run this for a while. So, the first thing to do is we have to get to the retaining screws because they're hidden. I added a frame along this chassis, and the purpose of that is to just look more realistic. It also hides the highboy look of these locomotives. Looks more prototypical. The screws are at the back of the cabs, but there is a retainer that a screw cover. You stick a screwdriver, a flat blade screwdriver, or an X-Acto knife, and very gently pull this out. There's one on the other side. These are notched so that you can get to them. There we go. There's a little notch right there so you can get and catch the back of this. Now, these are coded because when I first did this I would get confused. Okay, time to reassemble which is which. When holding each cab in this orientation with the nose up, cab down, these have notches on them. This one has one notch right at my thumbnail. This one has one notch at this end. Okay? So the way these are oriented is the long notch is left. L for long, L for left. So this one goes on this side. And this is flattened on one side in order to cover the screw. So you have to find the flattened end. And there it goes, designed to fit perfectly. Hides that screw wonderfully. And short is right. Also, it may have one notch or two. If it has two notches, it's for the B cab. If it has one notch, it's for the A cab. Now this is the A cab because it's a fairly clean roof. There's not a lot of coils and other stuff up here. The B cab has all kind of extra details up here. Alright, now there's the screw right there, hidden at the back of the cab. Steel screws. And then the front is right at the nose, and to get to it you have to rotate the truck sideways, and there it is right there. This is a shorter screw. Now these screws are not identical. The two at the rear are flattened so as to hide them. The head is flattened. The one at the nose doesn't need to be flattened, so it's got a regular size head. That's how you tell them apart. The flat ones are the ones that matter, because they have to be flat in order to slip underneath these screw covers. Alright, I'm going to turn this back forward now. And we're going to very carefully, now that ladder is on this side, be very careful. Now this locomotive has sandboxes, and that makes everything a little tight when getting everything out of here. The decoder is hidden up front in the nose, so we have to get past the sandboxes, and you'll see once I gently lift up, wiggle just a little. Now notice I'm going to go forward once I clear the sandboxes. Very gentle, very gentle. There it is. Now everything is still wired together, so I just want to set this down. tuck that back for now. Alright. I designed this to be modular so that the entire thing can be taken apart easy. Maintenance is easy. Everything simply unplugs or unscrews. No unsoldering. You don't need a soldering iron just to do maintenance. Okay? Here is what you'll see. There is wires that go from the nose in the shell up to the decoder. These are for the headlights. Okay? Then we have the decoder right here. The decoder plugs into a socket, so the decoder can be completely removed. And I'm going to do that now. The motor obviously is here. There's a notch in the gearbox so that the motor can be lifted out. You do not have to disassemble the gearbox just to get the motor out. In order to get the decoder, just grab it right under the insulation. You might want to press your finger right there for a little leverage and pull. And these are not such great tweezers. Let me get my good quality ones. The tweezers are actually most helpful for, there we go, for adding that jumper wire in the boiler room. Now, the decoder, I made it modular. Once again, I wired this myself. There's a socket, micro socket here, and it'd be helpful if I kept the orientation. I'll probably have a mark on these. This is for, there we go. Now, the decoder is totally out. Notice the decoder is labeled. This is the A decoder. Also, you'll notice there's a plus sign. That's because in the orientation of this socket, the positive is on this side. That would be the blue wire under normal decoder situations. And the negative wire is on this side. Now, if I have a squeaky locomotive, I need to oil the motor bearings, and I don't really need DCC for testing that. So these have analog plugs that are included. The analog plugs basically have the outer pins jumpered together. So let's count this: 1, 2, 3, 4. 1 and 2 are jumpered together, and 3 or 4 are jumpered together, which would correspond to the red and orange wires and the black and gray wires. Well, this just plugs in right into the socket, and there's no way to get it backwards. So as long as you get the 4 pins in the 4 holes, you're doing good. There it is. This will now run on analog. Removal is the same. Okay, now this is for disassembly. We want to remove the motor. There's only 2 steps to do that, and that is to remove this little jumper wire here that goes down to the front truck. So the way this is oriented, the back truck is the power truck, transmits all the electricity from one rail and then through the frame to the motor. The front truck is insulated from the entire assembly and has a jumper wire that comes up to the motor. Alright, so with that jumper wire off, I can now take the screwdriver, and I have 2 screws right on the end of the motor. Be careful not to damage the sandboxes or hold on to any other part and damage a part. Try to hold it by the motor. Now these screws don't come off as easily because they're steel and the motor is magnetized, obviously. Alright, the motor just simply lifts out now. There it is. All modular. Notice the motors are numbered, and that's to help. I paired these up. I had a bunch of these motors, so I wanted to get the ones that run best together. And some of the motors also have an A or a B so that you can always remember which one they go on. This one is not labeled yet, but I'll probably label it before I paint it. This is an A cab, so I'll scratch a letter A on this motor. Now there is one last thing. You shouldn't have to ever disassemble this, but this heat shield is actually part of the conductive process of this entire motor. So the motor is wired with the gray wire, and a pole goes up here, and then the black, which is one of the rails, actually goes to the frame. It goes to this heat shield itself. So electricity comes through the screws in the brace, goes through the heat shield, which is also steel, and then to the decoder. Alright, we're getting to the guts of this now. You'll notice that this has a couple of parts. One is the gearbox. We can remove that in order to remove the power truck. This is a height adjusting screw. This assembly has no bearings around the worm. The motor is freestanding. Well, how do we get the height just right? Well, this L angle is rigid and it's bent forward ever so slightly, and then the motor rests on this plastic screw. Obviously you change the height and the angle of the motor by adjusting that screw. It has a Phillips cross kind of etched into the top of that screw, and so it's designed, when we get this all assembled, you'll see that you can stick a tiny screwdriver in there and adjust the height. Lastly, there's this screw right here. This is the retaining screw to the front truck, and it has some insulating washers right there. Alright, let's take the gearbox off. This requires a little bit of carefulness because we don't want to damage all these little gentle parts that are soldered together. So I want to hold it firmly. Now you'll notice that one thing I do sometimes is lift the front so that the rear end is pressing on the truck itself. Now when I bear down, I'm pressing on the truck, as it were. I'm just cracking open the screws. Now it's good to loosen these screws but not remove them yet. And you'll see why. It's because there's a headless screw, that screw came out, that holds that truck in place. And so you can see the split. It's a straight edge screwdriver. This side has no slot. This side does. And so I'm going to very gently unscrew this. You never want to over torque it. A smaller screwdriver would be better, but this one is sufficient. Here it comes. Alright, it's unscrewed as far as it can unscrew, and now we need to pull it out. This is very typical of almost all Kumata locomotives. This is a headless screw which serves to retain the truck, and it's metal, it conducts electricity. So the electricity comes through the wheels to the truck through this point here, which touches the metal gearbox, which charges the frame of the whole locomotive, which then goes to the motor. Obviously that creates a weak spot electrically, because no matter how many wheels you got, there's only 2 spots to touch, and that's when this pin is riding in this slot. So consequently, we're going to improve the electrical conductivity of this locomotive by adding a little spring, phosphor bronze pickup spring there. So this touches the truck frame, and it rubs right on the very back of the locomotive frame. This serves to keep the truck from torquing. I have actually seen EP-2s, when I put them on the track and applied power, and the truck torques, it lifts, and you obviously lose traction. So consequently, this helps do that. It keeps everything straight. This has been a great plus. And you should also know that without the retaining headless screw, the main drive gear, which has been polished, be very gentle with it, fits in there. There's no reason to ever need to disassemble this whole truck now, because you can clean it exactly as it is. Alright, with the headless screw out and with the truck out, I can now totally remove the gearbox. It's important to keep track of all my screws, so I have them in groups. Now this is especially susceptible to damage now that I have taken apart, because there's nothing protecting that little ladder now, so always be very careful with that. Okay, so I've got cab screws there. I've got the camera. I've got the gearbox screws here. I have the motor screws over here, and the motor I'm going to put in the general neighborhood. So these are gearbox screws. I'll put the gearbox near that. Okay, I don't know that you would ever need to do this, to be honest with you, but if you ever had to get it down, like maybe your paint scheme gets scratched, trashed, whatever, and you want to start over, repaint it, well, you would have to get it down to the very basic bare bones. So this is the one screw that holds the front truck on. I'm going to pull it. It's got several parts to it, and I didn't want to do that. I wanted to put my finger on top of it, and I lost it. That's okay. We'll pull all the parts out. Alright, what we've got here is the frame is now empty. Here's what came out. We've got a slotted bushing which fits into the frame there. That insulates the screw so it doesn't touch the frame. And then we have a screw with two washers. One is nylon and one is that reddish cardboard fiber. Set this aside. And now we have the front truck. And the front truck, you'll notice, also has wipers. That's because Kumada designed this with a wire that was soldered to the frame, ran up through a hole, and that wire, it was only a matter of time before it finally broke. So this removes all of that. We've got two wipers that balance the strength, the tilting action of the pressure, and it's just more reliable. Now they wipe onto a little circuit board here. You can see the areas they wipe. So if you ever want to clean and polish this, it would be fine. And I'm not going to do it now, but you can see there's really only one last step to disassembly, and that's this screw right here, which is electrically isolated. You remove this screw, and then the circuit board now comes out with the jumper wire. Then after you remove the plastic height adjustment screws, the rest of this is solid brass, and you could get the paint off of it. You could paint a new coat of paint on it from there.